I never imagined the deepest betrayal of my life would come from the person I raised with love, sacrifice, and trust. My late mother's necklace, delicate gold, worn with years, carrying the scent of old memories, was the only piece of hers I had left. I protected it like a heartbeat. But one morning, it was gone. I searched drawers, shelves, boxes, every corner of my home with shaking hands. When I finally asked my son, expecting concern, he didn't even look up from his phone. "Stop whining," he said coldly. "It's already sold. I needed the money for my trip." His voice felt like a knife, but what came next stunned me even more. A pawn shop owner called, his voice urgent, uneasy. "Ma'am, we opened the locket on the pendant, and you won't believe what we found inside." My world froze. What was hidden in that necklace all these years? My name is Leora Hemsley. I'm 52 years old, and the one thing I treasured most in this world was my late mother's necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant I never took for granted. It wasn't expensive, but it held every memory of her smile, her warmth, her voice. After she passed, that necklace became the heartbeat of my grief, the anchor I held on to through every storm. I kept it in a velvet box inside my dresser, checking it often just to feel connected to her. But in the morning, everything changed. The box was light, too light. When I opened it, my heart collapsed into silence. The necklace was gone, and in that moment, I felt like I had lost my mother all over again. I woke early that morning, thinking of wearing the necklace because it was my mother's birthday, another year without her. I reached into the drawer, expecting the familiar weight of the velvet box, but something felt off. When I opened it, the emptiness inside hit harder than any grief I had ever felt. I tore through the drawer, thinking maybe it had slipped out. Then I searched the vanity, the bathroom counter, even under the bed. Nothing. The panic was instant and overwhelming, like the room had shrunk and the air had thickened. I replayed the last time I wore it, convinced I had misplaced it, but deep down, an unsettling suspicion crawled into my chest because someone else had been near that drawer. Within minutes, my quiet home turned into a war zone of scattered drawers and overturned baskets. I searched the laundry room, the kitchen, the car, the closet, every corner where something might fall, even places it could never logically be. I checked behind cushions, under appliances, and coat pockets. The harder I looked, the more my fear grew. Jewelry doesn't just disappear. Not this one. My hand shook as I moved from room to room, calling out for an answer only silence gave back. Every second felt heavier, every memory sharper. This wasn't a misplaced object. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and the only person who had been unusually close to my room lately was my son, Aiden. The thought chilled me, but I wasn't ready to believe it, not yet. All morning, Aiden avoided me like I carried a storm. He stayed in his room with the door half closed, music barely masking the tension. Normally, he'd wander into the kitchen or ask about breakfast, but he didn't even glance at me. When I finally caught his eye, he looked away too quickly, guilt flashing for just a second. His backpack lay open on the floor, filled with clothes he never told me he planned to pack. My stomach twisted. Something didn't add up. He was restless, pacing, checking his phone repeatedly as if waiting for a message. That necklace meant nothing to anyone but me, unless someone needed quick money. A luxury vacation brochure sat on his desk, and suddenly the puzzle pieces began to fit together in a way I didn't want to accept. I stood at his door, heart pounding, and asked the question I'd been terrified to say aloud. "Aiden, did you take Nana's necklace?" He paused, froze, then forced a laugh, too casual, too rehearsed. "Why would I want that old thing?" he said. But his eyes darted toward his phone and his shoulders tensed. I stepped inside, refusing to back down. "It's gone, Aiden. It didn't disappear by itself." His expression hardened, and the warmth in his face drained away. For the first time, he looked at me like a stranger, cold, irritated, defensive. The silence stretched until it suffocated the room. Then, with a shrug that cut deeper than any blade, he said, "Why are you making this a big deal?" My heart cracked. He wasn't denying it. He was deflecting. When I pressed him again, reminding him it was the last thing I had of my mother, he rolled his eyes, actually rolled them. "Mom, stop whining," he said bluntly, grabbing his backpack. "It's already sold. I needed that money for my trip." The words slammed into me, each one heavy and cruel. I felt the room tilt, my breath caught between disbelief and heartbreak. He didn't regret it. He didn't even try to hide it. He spoke like he had every right to take what wasn't his. My hands trembled as he brushed past me, muttering about needing a break. But all I could hear was the shattering sound of the trust I had built for 18 years collapsing in an instant. My own son had traded memories for luxury. The moment he walked out, I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and began dialing every pawn shop, one after another. My voice broke each time I described the necklace, hoping someone would say, "Yes, we have it." But call after call, the answer was always the same. "No, ma'am, nothing like that here." Desperation turned into a knot in my chest. I begged, pleaded, even offered to pay more than they bought it for. Every rejection felt like sinking deeper into grief. On the 10th call, a man hesitated. "Ma'am, give me your number," he said quietly. "If something comes up, I'll call you back." His tone felt strange, serious, almost uneasy. I hung up, sat on the edge of my bed, and prayed he was the one who had it. Hours later, the phone finally rang. The phone rang just as I was about to lose hope, and when I answered, the man on the other end sounded breathless, almost shaken. "Ma'am, this is Victor from Silver Row Pawn," he said slowly. "I think we have your necklace." My heart jumped so hard I could barely speak. He asked me to describe it, and when I mentioned the worn gold chain and small pendant, he exhaled sharply. "Yes, that's the one." But his tone wasn't normal. It carried a weight that made my skin prickle. "Can you come in?" he asked, then added, "There's something you need to see." His voice wasn't transactional or annoyed like most pawnshop clerks. It was disturbed, and that terrified me even more than losing the necklace itself. When I arrived, Victor came out from behind the counter like he had been waiting anxiously. His hands trembled slightly as he held the necklace in a cloth, as though it were fragile or dangerous. "Before I give this back," he said quietly, "I need to explain something." He swallowed hard, like the words were stuck. "Your son didn't even ask for a price. He just dropped it off, said he needed cash immediately. But when I inspected it, something felt off. The pendant wasn't sealed properly." He looked around the shop nervously, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, I've handled thousands of pieces, but I've never seen anything like what I found." His hesitation only deepened the dread in my chest. It felt like the room had thickened around us. Victor placed the necklace between us and gently tapped the pendant. "I didn't know it opened," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But when I pressed along the edge, it clicked." My breath caught. All my life I had worn that necklace during milestones and grief, never once realizing the pendant wasn't solid. "When we opened it, we found something inside," he continued, "something your son didn't know about." My hands shook as I reached for the pendant, but he gently stopped me. "Before you look, I need you to understand this wasn't just jewelry. Someone hid this intentionally." He looked me straight in the eyes. "Whatever your mother carried, she wanted it kept secret." The world around me seemed to slow. What could my mother have hidden from everyone, even me? When Victor finally opened the pendant again, the tiny click felt louder than thunder. Inside the locket was a minuscule folded piece of paper, so thin and delicate it looked ready to dissolve. "I didn't unfold it," he said. "It wasn't my place, but I knew it wasn't something to ignore." The compartment was expertly crafted, invisible unless you knew it existed. My mother had worn this necklace every day, yet I never sensed a secret tucked inches from her heart. Victor explained how the mechanism was decades old, something rarely seen except in custom heirlooms meant to conceal things. My pulse hammered as I lifted the paper, my fingers trembling. What truth was important enough for my mother to hide, yet close enough to carry for years? With trembling fingers, I began unfolding the fragile paper, terrified it would tear. Written in my mother's handwriting, soft, slanted, unmistakably hers, were a few short words, words that didn't feel like a message, but a confession, a name, a date, and 3 words that made my knees buckle. He never knew. The room tilted and Victor steadied my arm. My mother had never spoken of another man, never hinted at secrets. She was gentle, devoted, predictable, or so I believed. But this hinted at a hidden part of her life, something she carried in silence. "Ma'am," Victor whispered, "this looks important, dangerous even." The note felt heavier than the necklace itself, as if it carried years of truth my mother planned to reveal one day, but didn't live long enough to share. As I stared at the note, memories of my mother swirled, moments where she hesitated before answering a question, times she locked away old letters, the distant look she sometimes carried when she thought no one noticed. Suddenly, all those moments made a chilling kind of sense. The necklace wasn't a sentimental keepsake, it was a vault, a place where she stored a truth she could never risk exposing carelessly. The name on the note, one I had never heard in my life, stung like a hidden wound reopening. Was this man connected to her past? To my father? To me? Victor watched me with concern, urging me to breathe, but my world had already shifted. The necklace wasn't just stolen, it was unlocked. Leaving the pawn shop, I held the necklace so tightly I could feel the edges pressing into my palm. The note burned in my pocket like a secret begging to be heard. Every step I took felt heavier, every breath harder. My son had betrayed me for luxury, but my mother, she had hidden an entire life from me. Questions clawed at my mind. Who was the man named in the note? What did my mother mean by "he never knew"? And why hide it so deliberately? I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't a simple family keepsake anymore. This was the beginning of a mystery that would unravel everything I thought I understood about my family and myself. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling through every social media account my son, Kalen, had. Photos, stories, tagged posts, anything that could tell me what he had really been planning. He had said it was just a small getaway, but the pictures I found online told a very different story. 5-star resorts, jet ski rentals, private yacht parties, luxury dining spots booked weeks ahead. My heart clenched as I realized none of these things were cheap, not even close. There was no way he could afford this without stealing something valuable. My mother's necklace, her last gift to me, was the perfect target. The deeper I searched, the clearer it became. This wasn't a spontaneous trip. It was a long-planned escape built on the trail. Later that evening, I checked his bank statements, something he never expected me to do. The transactions made my stomach twist. Every withdrawal matched the dates of his trip bookings, flights, hotel deposits, expensive excursions. But one transaction stood out, a large cash deposit the day my mother's necklace went missing. There it was, the exact amount the pawn shop told me they gave him. It confirmed everything I feared. He hadn't sold the necklace out of desperation. He had strategically used it as a funding source for his fantasy vacation. I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of grief, shock, and anger. How could my own son value luxury over legacy, over family, over me? The next morning, I contacted two of his close friends, Riven and Daxon, hoping they might shed light on what was going on. To my surprise, they weren't defensive. They sounded worried. Riven told me they were uncomfortable with how obsessed Kalen had become with living large. Daxon admitted he warned him not to use the necklace money. That stunned me. They knew. They tried to stop him. They even said they noticed him bragging about how easily he could get cash out of the house anytime he wanted. Hearing that shattered me. It wasn't a one-time lapse. It was a habit, a pattern, a mindset. And suddenly the truth wasn't just heartbreaking, it was terrifying. Once I replayed everything in my head, the pattern became clear. Kalen had spent years manipulating me, gaslighting, guilt-tripping, fake apologies, convenient promises he never kept. He always knew when to play the poor me card and when to act offended to divert attention. The necklace incident wasn't random. It was simply the boldest act in a long chain of selfish behavior. He had learned exactly what emotional buttons to push to make me doubt myself. I realized I had spent years enabling him without even knowing it. My mother always warned me, love your children, but don't blind yourself. And now I finally understood what she meant, but far too late. I opened old messages, receipts, and emails, pieces of conversations I once dismissed, and as I pieced them together, I discovered that Kalen hadn't been lying for weeks or months, but years. Small lies at first, little stories about losing cash, fake emergencies, misplaced gifts, things I brushed off because I trusted him, but trust had blinded me to a growing darkness. Even worse, he had lied about visiting my mother in her final months. He told me he had work. Riven later revealed he was at parties. The betrayal stung so deeply I had to steady myself against the wall. How had I missed all this? How much had I let him get away with because he was my son? When Kalen finally came home, the air felt like it could crack. I confronted him with everything, the bank statements, the pawn shop call, his friends' confessions. At first he laughed, brushing it off like I was overreacting. Then, when he realized I wasn't backing down, he snapped. He shouted that I never gave him anything, that the necklace was just a worthless piece of metal, and that he deserved that vacation. His words hit harder than any physical blow. For the first time, I saw no remorse in his eyes, only entitlement. We argued until my voice broke, but it was his final sentence that ended everything. You're lucky I didn't take more. That was the moment something inside me finally shattered. The house fell silent after his outburst. I felt numb, hollow, and strangely calm. I looked at Kalen, my son, yet a stranger, and told him to pack his things. He scoffed at first, but when he realized I meant it, panic flickered across his face. Still, I didn't waver. He had crossed a line he could never uncross. I handed him his bag and opened the door. You don't get to disrespect your grandmother's memory and stay under her roof, I said quietly. He tried to guilt-trip me one last time, but this time I didn't bend. The door closed behind him, and for the first time in years, I wasn't confused. I was certain and painfully aware that this was only the beginning. The next morning, I drove back to the pawn shop, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The owner, Mr. Heron, greeted me with a serious expression, as if he already knew why I had come. He took out a small velvet pouch and placed it gently on the counter. Ma'am, this necklace, it wasn't just valuable, it was hiding something. His tone made my heart race. He explained that when they cleaned the pendant, they discovered a tiny hinge on the side, almost invisible unless you knew it was there. My breath caught as he slid open the locket right in front of me. Inside was something that didn't belong to any ordinary piece of jewelry, something that could change everything. Inside the locket was a miniature, faded photograph, barely the size of my thumbnail. It showed my mother holding a newborn baby wrapped in a cream blanket. But the baby wasn't me. I stared at it, confused and breathless. "Do you recognize the child?" Mr. Heron asked gently. I shook my head, unable to speak. My mother never mentioned another baby, another family member, nothing. The image felt like a window into a life she had never shared. The edges of the photo were worn, as if she had opened and closed the locket countless times. Why did she keep this hidden? Why didn't she ever tell me? My heart pounded as I realized this wasn't an accident. She meant for me to find it someday. Mr. Heron reached into the pouch again and pulled out a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper. "This was tucked behind the photo," he said. My eyes widened as I unfolded it carefully. It was my mother's handwriting. The ink was slightly smudged, but the words were clear enough to read. "For the day you need the truth," it began. My stomach twisted. She wrote about a secret she had kept her entire life, something she couldn't bear to tell me face to face. The letter hinted at betrayal, fear, and a choice she made to protect me. But she didn't reveal everything. She wrote only enough to lead me toward a truth she believed I would find when I was ready. And apparently, today was that day. At the bottom of the letter, one name was written: Elias Rowan. I had never heard of it before, not from my mother, not from any relative, not even in passing conversation. Why would she hide a name so carefully? I asked Mr. Heron if he recognized it, but he shook his head. "Whoever he is," he said softly, "your mother wanted you to know about him." The name sent chills down my spine. Was he the baby in the photo? A lost sibling? A family member erased from our history? The uncertainty gnawed at me. My mother was always loving, warm, and honest, or so I believed. But now her silence felt deliberate, protective, heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this name was the key to everything. The letter mentioned something else, something that made my knees weaken as I read it. My mother wrote that the man I grew up believing was my father wasn't. She explained that before meeting him, she had been involved with someone dangerous, someone whose identity she had hidden for my safety. She didn't mention his name, but she hinted that Elias Rowan was connected to him. My chest tightened as years of confusion suddenly aligned. My father's distant behavior, his lack of connection, the way he treated me like I wasn't truly his. Perhaps he knew the truth all along. Perhaps they both did. And now I was left standing in the pawn shop, discovering that my entire identity had cracks I never knew existed. As I read deeper, the letter revealed pieces of my mother's life I never imagined. She wrote about running from her past, starting over, and hiding the necklace as a reminder of everything she had sacrificed. The locket was her safeguard, her anchor to a life she abandoned to keep me safe. The photo was proof of what she lost, and the name, a clue to what she feared would one day return. She said she wanted to tell me the truth when I was older, but circumstances never allowed it. The weight of her words pressed against my heart. My mother wasn't just gentle and kind. She was strong, brave, and terrified of something powerful enough to chase her into silence. The final lines of the letter explained why she had guarded the necklace so fiercely. It wasn't just sentimental, it was a key. "If danger ever finds you," she wrote, "this necklace will lead you to the person who can protect you." That person, she said, was connected to the name Elias Rowan. My breath caught. This wasn't just about family secrets. This was about safety, legacy, and unfinished business. My son selling it wasn't just disrespectful, it was dangerous. I suddenly realized why she seemed so protective of me growing up. She wasn't hiding from her past, she was shielding me from it. And now, with the necklace gone, I had no choice but to follow the trail she left behind. If you're ready to see how this secret turns my entire life upside down, make sure to subscribe, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew. I walked into the legal office with the letter, the locket, and every document proving the necklace belonged to my late mother. The attorney, Miss Carson, listened carefully as I explained how my son had sold it without permission. She assured me that because it was an inheritance item, it legally remained my property, regardless of who pawned it. We filed an emergency claim to retrieve it, and while the process was frightening, I felt a fierce strength rising inside me, something my mother must have felt when she made her impossible decisions. For the first time, I wasn't acting out of anger toward my son. I was acting out of duty to protect my mother's truth and to safeguard the secrets she risked everything to hide. When my son, Damon, received the legal notice, he stormed into my house with outrage written all over his face. But this time, I didn't shrink beneath his temper. I stood tall and steady as he shouted about his vacation, his freedom, and his right to make choices. I reminded him calmly that choices have consequences, and he had crossed a line no child should ever cross. When I told him the necklace held secrets tied to our family's safety, he fell silent, anger draining into confusion. But I didn't explain further. Not yet. The moment wasn't about revealing the past. It was about teaching accountability. For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of realization in his eyes, but it came far too late. When I finally located Elias Rowan, my hand shook as I waited outside the small countryside cottage he lived in. A tall, quiet man with silver-streaked hair opened the door, and the moment he saw the locket around my neck, his expression softened with recognition and grief. "You must be her daughter," he whispered. Stepping inside felt like entering another lifetime, one filled with memories I had never lived. Elias explained that he had known my mother long before I was born, and that the baby in the photograph was someone she tried desperately to protect. Every word he spoke deepened the questions swirling inside me, yet one truth was undeniable. My mother had trusted him enough to leave her final message in his hands. Elias invited me to sit, then carefully unfolded a stack of letters my mother had sent him over 3 decades ago. In them, she described a man who had threatened her, a man she once loved but feared more than anyone else. She ran to protect her unborn child, me. The baby in the photograph was Elias's son, whom my mother helped hide when danger closed in. She kept the locket as a silent reminder of a promise she made: to protect both children, regardless. The cost. Hearing this shattered and healed me at the same time. My mother wasn't just guarding a secret. She was carrying a burden heavy enough to crush most people. And she carried it alone, so I wouldn't have to. After hours of talking, Elias placed his hand over mine and said, "Your mother trusted you to finish what she couldn't." And for the first time, I understood what that meant. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about the man who threatened her long ago. It was about bringing truth to light, honoring her courage instead of burying her fears. I returned home with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I gathered every document, letter, and photograph and stored them safely, knowing that one day, when the time was right, I would tell my story. My mother's silence no longer felt like a wound. It felt like an inheritance, one worth protecting, one worth carrying forward with pride. That evening, Damon came to my house, quieter than I'd seen him in years. He didn't shout, didn't demand, didn't justify. He simply stood in the doorway and whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry." I listened, but my heart felt distant. His apology wasn't hollow. It was simply too late to undo the damage he'd caused. I told him I loved him, but trust was not something that could be rebuilt overnight. He nodded, tears gathering in his eyes, finally understanding that maturity wasn't measured by age, but by accountability. I hoped this would mark the beginning of his growth, but I also knew I needed space. Pain doesn't disappear just because someone admits they caused it. In the quiet days that followed, I held the necklace close, feeling my mother's strength pulse through it. I made a conscious decision not to remain trapped in betrayal, but to rise above it, I cut ties with the chaos, kept my distance from Damon until he showed genuine change, and focused on rebuilding my own life with clarity and dignity. The secrets of the locket no longer felt like a burden, but a legacy of resilience. Sitting on my porch one evening, I whispered a thank you to my mother, knowing she had guided me even in her silence. I chose peace, not because the pain disappeared, but because I finally understood the courage it took to create it.